We're joined by up-and-coming backbenchers Annika Wells and Andrew Bragg. Thank you so much for your time. We've got Annika from Brisbane and Andrew, it looks like you're in Sydney today for us. Now, we want to start with this Twitter ban. It's only just come through recently, just in the last few hours, but they're banning political advertising. Annika, you're all over the social media platforms. I've seen you've joined TikTok recently as well. Do you think this is a good move?
Yes, it is. It's a good thing that they're doing, and I hope that Facebook in particular and other social media platforms jump on board. I don't know if you saw the congressional hearings that Mark Zuckerberg took part in recently in the States, but when Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez put to him, can I advertise under the Facebook current rules the wrong date for the election? He basically admitted that you could, and she asked, could Republicans, could I put advertising that states the Republicans support my Green New Deal? And he said, yes, under the current rules you could. So the current status cannot stand. This is a good move from Twitter. I hope Facebook in particular jumps on board.
What do you think, Andrew? Isn't this limiting freedom of speech?
Well, look, there's not too many quiet Australians on Twitter, so I don't think that is going to really change much in the Australian electoral landscape. But look, you know, I use Twitter to talk to people like you, Annalise, so I'm pretty relaxed about these changes.
I know it's an occupational hazard of journalism. We need to be on it to see what people are talking about. But what do you make of that point, Annika? Is it just, as Andrew describes it, quiet Australians on there?
Andrew and his quiet Australians, spare me. There's about 17% of Australians who use Twitter, so I agree that political advertising reform needs to go much further, but it's a pretty good start. You know, I'm here in Fortress of Lily, surrounded by Liberal seats, at ground zero of Clive Palmer's $60 million campaign to keep Labor out of government. I think we should do a lot more in the space of political advertising. This is a good start.
Andrew, on the point of the Twitterati and what they direct in the national conversation, we've had a lot of analysis of why Labor lost the election, and Claire O'Neill's waded in today saying that they isolated regular Labor voters by talking down to them by being progressives.
Well, look, I think the biggest structural problem the Labor Party has is that it's owned by the unions. So in a day-to-day sense, so many of their policies have actually been drafted by the unions. That's a big problem for them. Like yesterday, I was chairing an inquiry into an amnesty our government's proposing on unpaid super. Labor is opposing that because the unions have told them to do so. So I think their biggest structural problem is their ownership by the unions.
What do you make of that, Annika? Is it time for Labor to drop the unions?
Oh, I live for the Andrew Bragg take on the structural problems of the ALP.
It's a good rating. I'll send you a copy.
I actually lived this. Spare me. I actually lived this yesterday. I was in Brighton doing home visits. I spoke to a couple of people. Brighton is interesting because it's got about a 17% Greens primary. It's a polarised part of the world. It's also on the forefront of the effects of climate change. It gets king tides, it gets floods from time to time, it gets very severe hailstorms. And some of the people I was speaking to yesterday were incredibly dismissive of Greenies and their issues. And they basically wouldn't listen to them because they found them to be patronising. So I think this is the point that Claire's making. If people aren't listening to us, none of our ideas, none of our plans, and none of our messages are getting through, then we won't be able to do anything in government because we're not going to make it there. So if there are things that we can do to help people listen, or if there are things that we're doing that are stopping people from listening, then we should have a serious look at that and do better.
What do you think, Andrew? Are progressives being too patronising?
Yes.
Oh.
I gave you a free hit. You could give me a bit more than that, you know?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, like obviously there is a patronising tone that often comes from those quarters Annika described, but like even if you sort the tone problem, the ownership structure is still a major impediment to Labor becoming a party of the mainstream.
Right, let's move on to one of the other big discussions this week, and that's been... Oh no, go ahead.
This actually came up you might have seen yesterday, probably on Twitter, President Obama talking about the call-out culture, both on Twitter and in activism. And the point he makes is a very good one, and I think it's the same point that Claire is making today. If all you do is call out other people for their flaws and their failings, then you're not actually doing anything to contribute positively to the cause. You're not actually creating change. So I think that's the point that's being made today. Alan Jones, Claire O'Neill, President Obama, quite the unity ticket.
Well, I think
Absolutely.
it's a good point. That's a good point, and that's why I've always sought to advance a policy case in whatever I'm doing, but it doesn't mean I can't point out some helpful pointers here and there.
Also an excellent example of a good message that's making way on Twitter. Let's move on to one last topic we want to cover today, and that's the voice to Parliament. Andrew, I know this is something you're quite passionate about. There has been pushback on having more consultations on a voice when this already came from very extensive discussions already. Is this the government kicking the can down the road?
Well, this is exactly what the Uluru statement and then the parliamentary inquiry which investigated it effectively called for, which was a genuine process of co-design where Indigenous people would be able to design a process in conjunction with government for having a consultative mechanism. At the end of the day, this is about asking Indigenous people what they think about the laws which impact them, which I think is a good and a fair thing.
Annika, I can see you violently shaking your head while Andrew talks.
Yes, it is the government kicking the can down the road. When you look at what the Uluru Statement asks of us, and the Uluru Statement, the remarkable nature of it should not be underestimated, what it asks of us is recognition in the Constitution, a voice to Parliament, and truth-telling so that we can walk together towards progress. The current model that's being proposed this week is about maybe half a mark out of 3. So we need to do an awful lot better than this, and I hope that the government will see that in time. There's still time.
Do you support constitutional change,
But Linda Burney
Annika?
and the Labor Party have supported this announcement yesterday, which I think is very positive. So my sense is this is a really important policy area to maintain bipartisanship, which I think very much welcome the Labor Party's response to the announcement yesterday.
Just on that question, Annika, do you support constitutional change?
I do. I support constitutional recognition for our First Nations people. I think Linda welcomed any progress forward and the idea that there is a model for us to consider more fulsomely, but I think the reaction from our First Nations people yesterday was that this does not go far enough and it does not accurately enact what the Uluru Statement asked of them. And so that is the point that I am making, that they are not happy with how far this goes so far.
How do you feel about that point, Andrew? Do you support constitutional change?
Of course, I've been on the record on that issue, but this is about providing a serious consultative mechanism so that Indigenous Australians are consulted on the laws which impact them. And that's what the Parliamentary Joint Committee recommended, which we announced in the election, and we've now put in place a process to design a body. Now, there'll be various bodies considered during this process. I personally favour what's called the Speaking for Country model, but there'll be many models that will be considered by the committee.
Well, certainly one to watch. Annika Wells and Andrew Bragg, thank you so much for your time as always. Look forward to our next Poly panel when we can get you guys back together.
Good to be with you.